Welcome to the Homegrown Podcast, a place where we share the truth about food and farming from our kitchen to yours. I'm your host, Liz Haselmayer, along with my husband, Joey.
Good afternoon.
And together we hope to educate, inspire, and equip you in your pursuit of true nourishment. Today's guest is Vineet Dubey. Vineet is an environmental litigator who sues companies that are endangering the health and well-being of California citizens by selling products containing toxic chemicals. Because of Vineet's advocacy, thousands of products tainted with lead, cadmium, phthalates, and other cancer-causing chemicals have been taken off the shelves and cleaned up. And today we're going to be focusing on PFAS. So thank you so much. Welcome to the show, Vineet.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate being here today.
I am excited to dive into a somewhat mysterious topic because the internet likes to hone in on, kind of buzzwords. And I would say PFAS was a buzzword of 2023, which is exciting to see some awareness coming about, but I still think there's a lot of confusion. So can't wait to dive into that. Before we get there, though, I would like to hear how you even got into this line of work.
Sure. You guys are in South Carolina, is that right?
We're actually in Ohio. We're in the Midwest.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. So I grew up in Mississippi,
Okay.
Small town, had a great experience, really enjoyed it, was always interested growing up in civil rights work. And I thought I was going to end up being a civil rights attorney. And I had a lot of friends that were white and black, and we were all in the same school, and we were all mixing, and it was kind of the New South, and it kind of showed you how the country had progressed in the place that I grew up. And I was very excited about that. And like I said, I had a great experience, and I wanted to potentially become a civil rights attorney and help more parts of the country get to that level. It's kind of what I wanted to get to, and went to undergrad in Texas. I came out to UCLA to go to law school and ended up staying in California. And in my practice, starting to do litigation, I realized that through environmental law, I could really make a difference and touch everybody, right? And really help every segment of society, well off, not so well off, any race, any gender, because if we fix the environment and we clean it up, then every single person in America is affected by that, essentially, right? Mm-hmm. So I kind of shifted into environmental law, and here I am, right? I found myself 10 years later, me and my partner have founded this practice, and what I do is I sue companies that are bad actors, companies that are selling products that contain toxic chemicals, and they're either not warning consumers they have it, or they're just hiding the ball entirely. So that's how I got into environmental law. I really enjoy the practice. I think I'm making a very a positive impact. We're holding a lot of bad actor corporations accountable, and looking out for the little guy, and that's what I've always kind of wanted to do. PFAS, I personally have only began litigating these in the last year or so. And we can get into why that is, because they're so hard to find. And there's a reason why these chemicals have been used for 40, 50 years, and you're just hearing about them since last year, right? Mm-hmm. Like you said, the buzzword of 2023. Yeah. Because we have just now been able to, the science has just now been able to find them, which is really scary and crazy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you want to break down what the category of PFAS is for folks?
Sure. So PFAS are types of chemicals, and they're made with fluorine bonded atoms, essentially. And not to get too far into the science, but they were developed years ago by DuPont and 3M and these huge corporations. And essentially what they do is they make products waterproof, and they make products almost indestructible. Okay. So things that are made with PFAS: firefighting foam, electronics, furniture, food packaging, waterproof clothing.
Wow.
And essentially, if you have, they don't biodegrade. They're called forever chemicals because they last almost forever. So for corporations, obviously this is great because they can sell products in packaging that will never fall apart. So the products will be kept safe, right? Or they can sell electronic goods, and the chemicals that make up those electronics never come apart. So you're going to have an iPhone that lasts forever, that can survive falling out of a plane and landing 3,000 feet, right? Like we just heard.
Yeah.
So for corporations, it's great. What's the downside of these things? The downside of these things is they cause reproductive harm, which means pregnant women who come into contact with them can have kids with birth defects. They also cause cancer. So long-term exposure to these chemicals cause cancer in humans. We found that out. And the scary part, one of the reasons they're called forever chemicals is because what you make with them doesn't fall apart. Secondly, if you get them into your system, the half-life of a PFAS is 20 years. And so what that means is once you get it into your system, it's floating around in your body, causing trouble, doing bad things for 40 years, essentially.
Yeah.
And that's a large portion of your life. So that's why they're so scary, and that's why they're so malignant, and that's why they're such a big deal. The reason they've been floating around for 40 years is that these companies made them so small, so microscopic that labs can't test for them. You can't find them, right? To find the only labs that can test for them up until about 2 years ago were the labs at 3M and the labs at DuPont, these crazy multi-billion-dollar corporations that have the best technology we've ever seen. Even the government couldn't test. Even the FDA labs couldn't test and find PFAS until just a few years ago.
Wow.
And the issue is, to find PFAS, you have to test in the parts per trillion, right? So that's, most of the chemical testing we do is in parts per million, parts per billion, even for certain chemicals, and think about that, like a billion little dots, and you're testing for 10 out of a billion, right?
Yeah.
And so we have testing that can find that. And then you can find certain chemicals. But if you're doing that, you're not going to catch any PFAS because you have to go down to the parts per trillion. I mean, and it's kind of mind blowing. It's hard to wrap your mind around how detailed that testing is to find those. Like, for example, the EPA came out with guidelines that are hopefully going to be enacted soon about limits of PFAS in water. And the limits they want to set is 4 parts per trillion. So whenever you get a glass of water out of your tap, and if it was tested, the maximum you could have is 4 parts per trillion molecules of PFAS in that water, just to show like how detailed and how crazy the testing is in order to even find the PFAS and where they are.
Well, and this might be really uneducated, but my initial thinking is, if they're so slow to degrade, yet we keep manufacturing at such a high rate, aren't we going to come across a point where we can't turn off the faucet because they're just coming out? Like they're going to be making these products that contain PFAS forever unless we stop that portion. And then it takes so long for it to get out of the system, whether that's in the ground or in your body. So we're kind of flooding our house with a bathtub that's plugged up and the faucet's just running, right? You know what I mean?
And not to be a downer, but we may have hit that point already. I don't know. They've been doing this for 40 years.
Yeah.
For 40 years, these chemicals have been put into the groundwater, have been put into the ground, have been put into these products that we're using, have been put into our bodies. And we didn't know about it until 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah.
That's why they're so ubiquitous. And that's why, every day you're seeing, oh, this food product has PFAS. Oh, this packaging has PFAS. Oh, this water. Oh, this soil, because they've been doing it for 40 years and nobody has been able, it's so nefarious and evil genius. I mean, it's genius on their part, right? If you're a corporation and you want to make this chemical and use it ubiquitously to make tons of money because it's a very strong component and it makes, for them, great products, you make the chemical so small that nobody else can find it. And then you can use it for years and make billions of dollars and, pollute the environment for that long. So I hope we haven't reached that level already. I don't think we have. I think if we take if governments get on top of things and everybody takes action to eliminate these chemicals, hopefully the damage, too much damage hasn't been done already.
So like today, what is DuPont, who I'm pretty sure is an Ohio-based company, if they're not in Cincinnati? Isn't that true?
It sounds familiar, but I don't know
I'm
for
pretty,
sure.
because we're in Cincinnati, Ohio.
I think that might be right.
I'm pretty sure it's like local, which is frightening. So like, what is DuPont and 3M, you said? What are these companies doing today? Are they being halted? Are they, like, it seems like they should be not allowed to do these things, right?
Yeah, well, government regulation has finally kicked in, and they've made basically pledges to phase out the use of PFAS within the next 2 years, right? And they're also paying billions of dollars out in lawsuit settlements. That's another thing that's like caused them to walk back using PFAS. There have been these huge lawsuits about water systems all over the country, and 3M and DuPont have already set aside billions of dollars to resolve these things. And that's how you really make them stop, right? When a huge corporation like that starts losing billions of dollars, they say, okay, we have to do something else.
Wow.
Now, here, once again, not to be a downer, but what are they going to start using instead of PFAS?
Do
you think their scientists the last 20 years have already been thinking about this and developing something else that we don't know how toxic it is and we're not going to be able to find out? Hopefully not. But that's where the government has to do its job, right? That's where the FDA has to do its job. It can't be, one lawyer out in California suing hundreds of companies, because that's great, but that's not going to fix the problem at all. It's such a big problem. It's got to be government agencies all over the world regulating these companies to make sure that the next thing they use, the next thing they come up with, besides the next, evil genius plan that they come up with, we know what it is and we stop it before it starts, right? And once they start using it, we already can jump in and say, no, you can't use this either because it's causes cancer, right?
Right.
So it's a government thing. And that's why I always, whenever I talk to people about this subject, whenever I write articles about it, I always tell people, you have to call your congressman. You have to get this on their radar. This is the kind of stuff that matters, right? Out of all the stuff that the government does, whatever your political affiliation, this is the kind of stuff that's going to affect our kids and their kids and their kids, and really the future of the planet is regulating chemicals like this.
Yeah. I want to know. Oh, sorry, I cut you off.
No,
what
no.
did you say?
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I want to know the process of sort of your process when you want to work on challenging a company, I guess is how I'll say it nicely. How do you become aware that a company is stepping outside of the guidelines or they're poisoning us through their products? Like, what does that look like for you and how does that unfold?
Sure. So I'm lucky to live in California in some respects. In some respects, it's very expensive. It's
sure.
Et cetera, et cetera. It has its issues, but it has very strong environmental protections for consumers. And there's certain laws in California that make it easier to sue these companies, and they should be federal laws. They should be laws that the entire country can use, but unfortunately it's not. They're state laws. So I do a lot of work under one law called Prop 65, and there's another law that just took place January 1st of this year regarding PFAS content in food packaging. So because we have these laws, I'm able to work with environmental groups, some for-profit, some nonprofit, and what they do is they'll test products, right? I help them find a lab and I find a toxicologist, and they'll test products that we believe are potentially contaminated, and they'll bring me test results. And once I have these test results, then I can go through the process of sending a notice letter and then filing a lawsuit. And the lawsuit's either on behalf of the general public or it's a class action. And that's what makes these companies, become aware and start changing their practices. So once we have testing, once we have a toxicologist look at that testing to determine that there's actual exposure to humans, right? Because if I just have test a product and say, hey, this has lead, or hey, this has PFAS in it, and I go to these companies, they're going to say, well, yeah, sure, it has it. But unless you can show that it actually exposes humans the way we use that product, it's not a great case to litigate. So we not only have to have testing, we have to have a toxicologist analyze the product and see how much real world exposure there is to consumers to that chemical. And then we're on strong footing, right? Then I can file a lawsuit. Then I can go to that company and say, look, clean this up within 60 days, agree you're not ever going to use that, take the chemical out, pay civil penalties and a substantial amount of money, and then we won't sue you. And if they don't, we file the lawsuit and we litigate and we get a judge involved and make a judge say the same thing to them after a year of litigation, right? So that's kind of the process for me. Testing first, toxicologist analysis, and then we, bring our actions against these bad actor corporations.
Totally. I want to know, because I just saw something come out about Stanley's testing positive for lead when folks were doing like an at-home test. And I've also had, I am friends with the owners of a ceramics cookware company that they've had certain bloggers come out against them and say, hey, your cookware I tested it at home, it has lead in it. And they're like, listen, we're Prop 65, I don't know what you would say, approved, qualified, compliant. Yeah, we pass that every year when we have for the last 15 years. So my question is there a discrepancy when you do sort of like a DIY at-home testing? And then also, is there a difference between testing for chemical presence and then testing for its ability to transfer and affect us as we're using that?
Yes, on both. Absolutely. Absolutely. On DIY tests, look, they're not that reliable. Let's just be, they're not. To really find out what's in something, you need to have an FDA certified lab that follows all these crazy protocols and does all this QC, QA, like quality control analysis. And those are the labs that, I won't litigate a case unless I have testing from that kind of a lab, because it's not reliable, right? I mean, it's just not. If I don't know I don't even know what kind of tests there are at home for lead, but they're not going to be nearly as reliable or stand up to scrutiny in litigation unless it's from an FDA approved certified lab that has, scientists with 30 years of experience doing all this crazy stuff.
Totally.
And is there a difference between something just having a chemical in it and how it actually exposes a consumer? Absolutely. Yes. I mean, that's another reason why before I bring any kind of a lawsuit, we have a toxicologist who, has the list of letters behind his name, right? And has been doing this stuff for 30 years to actually gauge how a normal consumer's usage of this product leads to exposure and how much exposure and whether it exceeds limits that are allowed. So, you got to have both, and that's another thing. You can't just every time something has lead in it, sue a company.
Right.
It's just not going to, there's too many, but also it's not always dangerous, right? I mean, just to be honest, there's levels of lead in the soil. So a lot of things are going to have a little bit of lead, and that's just the reality we live in. And unless it's dangerous, unless it's really exposing someone to these levels that are above their approved levels, then it doesn't make sense to go after those companies.
Yeah, there was a lot of chatter on social media last year. Someone tested the KitchenAid, it's like brushed metal. Yeah. Well, it was all of their stuff.
All of them. Okay. And
they were like, this has lead in it. And then all of these primarily like women were calling the company and they were like, hey, your product has lead in it. Da, 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 da. And the company, of course, is like, no, it doesn't. It's fine. And part of me was like, listen, I get the concern to feel like you're duped, but are we wasting our time on some of these like smaller fires that in reality that led to what you're saying isn't actually going to harm you because it's never going to leach out of that versus, hey, you have PFAS in your water supply you should be concerned about. If you're drinking tap water, that's more concerning than the lead showing up on that at-home test from your KitchenAid. You know what I'm saying?
100%.
Do you see that often?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And I have to do for me personally, right? There's only so many hours in the day when I'm at work that I'm doing these cases that I can devote to them. So I have to pick and choose, right? And I'm not going to go after something that I don't think is really affecting people. I mean, if I have a good case where there's lead in baby food, right? I'm going to file that. I'm going to spend some time doing that because that's a huge deal and that impacts kids directly and destroys their development, right? But if I have a case where there's lead in some kind of a product and it's never going to leach out, and I have a toxicologist that says, look, it's never going to leach out, people are not going to be exposed to this, then we shouldn't be. I don't waste my time on those, right? My time is very valuable, and I want to do as many good cases as I can and really make a difference. And that's not going to make a difference, right? What's going to make a difference is doing the PFAS cases. What's going to make a difference is doing cases about lead in food that people are actually consuming, that kind of stuff. So yeah, I mean, just it's like anything else in life, right? You have to do kind of a analysis based on your time and your energy and what you can accomplish and how to go about that and make the most change, right? With those factors in play.
In your experience with the toxicologists that you've worked with over the years, where do you see the transmission or ingestion? Like what methods of utilizing a product are the most effective at transmitting these chemicals or issues to us, right? Metals.
It depends on the product. It depends on the chemicals we're talking about. It's very kind of case specific. Okay. Obviously the worst are lead contamination in food because that's you're directly consuming it, right? But for example, there's PFAS in certain food packaging. And, that's another thing that I just got into because that law kicked in January 1st of this year. So, for example, a lot of paper-based food packaging products. So let's say you get, not to say they're bad, but let's say you get macaroni and cheese, right? And it's in a little paper cup and you can put it, we've all seen it at the grocery store. And you can put it in the microwave and you can heat it up and you can your kids or you can eat it right out of the thing or you put it in a bowl. A lot of that food packaging, when it's heated up, also allows more PFAS to get into the food. So if you have food packaging that's paper based, that has PFAS in it, if it gets heated at all, that can lead to more contamination of the food inside of it. A lot of tools. I do a lot of cases with phthalates. Phthalates it's another chemical that causes reproductive harm and cancer, and they're also ubiquitous. Phthalates are kind of like PFAS light. Okay, so phthalates were developed to use in a lot of stuff, with PFAS, but they're not as strong. They don't last as long. They're just not as good from a corporate point of view, but they're, in the grips of hammers, right? A lot of tools have phthalates in the grips. So you're going to use them, wear your gloves, anytime you're using tools is one thing that I tell people. It's small stuff like that, right? But after you're done, wash your hands very, very thoroughly, with a lot of soap, and try to get the stuff off before you go grab food and start eating it. Because a lot of the contamination it doesn't really hurt you necessarily dermally when you get it on your hands. But once you get it on your hands or on your skin, and then you reach for that apple and you start eating it, that's when, you get more contaminated, and that's when it's bad.
And to almost answer, you answered that perfectly, and I asked it poorly, so thank you. But the ingestion would be like the number one concern, right? So if you're ingesting this thing, and some of the ways it sounds like you can almost leach it out of products would be through heat. It sounds like. So if you've got like a cup of noodles, I'm thinking of, right? Like I ate a ton of them.
Ramen.
So yeah. But those sorts of things, and you talk about the mac and cheese, we can all see it in the cup that goes in the microwave, and you pull it out, and then it's like, or you pour water. I don't even know how you do it, but
I don't know.
However, and yes,
cookware. Look, cookware is a big one too that contains a lot of PFAS. There's another law that I think it just kicked in July of this year in California that said PFAS have to be removed from any kind of cookware because companies used it because it helps it become nonstick, and it helps things be waterproof, and it helps, so once again, it makes a product that from there, it's, you can use it a long time, and it's not going to break, and it's not going to mess up, and there's not going to be a mess, and you're not going to get shit stuck to it where it makes a good waterproof pan. But unfortunately the side effect is that it could give you cancer. So that's another one. And talking about heat, right? If cookware has PFAS in it, and you're cooking food every night or once a week or twice a week, that it's going to leach out into the food, right? Because of the heat. So that's another thing to kind of keep in mind. So non-toxic cookware is like super important.
Yeah, I want to talk about that. I want your opinion on things. But it's interesting, as I'm hearing you give these examples, a lot of them were invented for convenience. You think about your packaged food that you can just microwave, that's convenience. You think about your nonstick cookware, so you don't have to worry about the finesse of cooking in a stainless steel or adding extra fat to the pan or learning how to sear a piece of meat without it sticking. Convenience. Like Teflon was created to be a convenient product.
1,000,000%. Stain resistant, everything's stain resistant, right? It's for convenience, right? So you can have products that just wipe off, right?
Right. So you think about, we've traded, we don't have to work as hard to clean our pan, but my goodness, if you have a scratch in that pan, are you exposing yourself to cancer causing chemicals? I mean, that's astounding. So talk to me about cookware, because I get this question a lot. We have eliminated all nonstick in our kitchen. We cook with ceramic, we cook with stainless steel, and we cook with cast iron. Where should people be looking in their kitchens for potential sources of PFAS, and what can they use instead?
And that's what we do in our house. We use cast iron and we use stainless steel.
Yeah.
And that's, you just said it. That's what people should do, right? If you can do it, if you can afford to do it, do that. Use cast iron, use stainless steel. Don't use nonstick things. If you're going to use some kind of nonstick, pan, make sure it has as many certifications as possible, non-toxic, lead-free, chemical-free, as much as you can see. If you're going to use one of those products, use the ones that are certified as non-toxic, right? Because because I know California has a state law, but I think a lot of other states have kind of enacted similar laws, for this type of cookware. So there are a lot of companies that are at least going through the protocols to try to make their pans as non-toxic as possible. So go for those, right? But once, like you said, stainless steel is better. Cast iron is better, and the cleaning involved is a little more intense with that kind of stuff. But that's, if you want to be healthier, that's the way to go about using those things. Put a filter on your tap if you're drinking tap water at your house, which actually now, we can talk about this nanoplastic bottled water stuff that just came out. It could be better for you now to drink tap water than bottled water, which is kind of scary, because for millions of, for so long, people are saying, hey, drink bottled water if you think your tap water smells funky, or if you don't think it's good. And everybody thought that was super healthy. And now we realize that it has millions of nanoplastics that, once again, we couldn't test for, because we couldn't, normal labs could not find things that small until just recently. And they just found out, and the Washington Post did this big article about it, about how there's, 100 times more plastics in bottled water than we used to think there was, because we couldn't see it. We couldn't test for it. If you haven't seen that article, take a look. it's an interesting one.
I think I read the headline, but I'll find it and we'll link it in the show notes for folks.
Yeah,
because that's wild.
So that's another thing. So another way to make your kitchen safer is drink tap water, but get a filter, right? There are all these different companies that sell filters that you can either attach directly to the spout, or even better yet, they're companies that sell them and you put them under, just under where the cold water line comes into your sink. And it just attaches, and it's not crazy to do. And, that's a great way to kind of clean your water, because some of those actually filter out PFAS. I mean, their systems are so good, they'll filter PFAS out of the water and everything else that contaminates it. Mm-hmm. So if you don't have a filter at your house for water, people should look into that, I think.
When we've recently found a water filter. It's like a pitcher that you fill up, but it's called Clearly Filtered, and they do claim to filter out PFAS. My question for you is, when they're making that claim as a company, I'm guessing they have to test the water before and after it runs through the filter, and they've got to use one of these labs that you're talking about that actually has the capacity to see the PFAS in it. Are there ways that companies can make claims that something filters out a PFAS if it doesn't actually? Like, is that something we need to be weary of, or or can we trust what they're saying?
So my firm, we have a few different departments, and I'd run the environmental law department, and another attorney we have here does false advertising, consumer class actions. So the answer to that is yes. Companies lie about things all the time, all the time, and they make false and misleading statements on packaging all the time, and it's and some of it is so blatant. Like, for example, he just had a case against a supplement company that was selling fish oil, and one of their products was normal strength and one of their products was extra strength, and it had a big 2 times extra strength, 2 times on the front label, and the actual percentages, it was one gave you 800 milligrams and one gave you 1200 milligrams, and they charged you twice for the one that's supposed to be 2 times the amount, right? I mean, it's just very blatant, right? Like, it should contain 1,600 milligrams of that supplement if it says 2 times the strength on it, right? I mean, just very commonsensical things that companies lie about, and they do it to make more money. So could those companies be doing that? Yes, absolutely. And the only way to know would be to test that water after it's been filtered, at an independent lab for PFAS content, and see if they're telling you the truth or not. Because they could be testing it, but they could also be using some kind of tests that are very cheap. Labs out of the country, right? They don't have the same regulations. They don't have the same stringent measures on them. And then putting that claim on there, and they can say, hey, we have a test. Here's our test. We're not lying about it. But the testing could be nonsense, could be garbage, right? And they're relying on that. And until some consumer group or the government actually checks that, they can get away with it.
Wow. And, they could, in the case of PFAS that are so small, they could be just using a test that's not, like, the holes in the net are too wide. You can't ever see them. So
there's no
PFAS.
Right. That's exactly right. If parts per million, you're never going to find a PFAS. Right. If they're testing at parts per billion, you're not going to find a PFAS.
Wow.
How is it getting into our water supply? Obviously, when people like I think of firefighters, they've got to have such high exposure to PFAS. I wonder if there's health effects tied to them. But like, say you're putting out a fire and the foam gets into the river. I understand that, but like, how else are PFAS getting into our water supply?
And it wasn't just the foam. It's when 3M has these huge factories that are making products, making firefighter foam, making electronic stuff, making whatever. They used to just dump the waste from the factories into the rivers. I mean, there was a movie, was Dark Waters, that Mark Ruffalo is an environmental attorney in that movie, and that was all about a huge case where I want to say it was DuPont had a chemical plant and they were making PFAS, and they were just dumping, literally, they had like a spout at the end of the factory, right? And they dumped the wastewater into the river next to the town, and then people were getting their drinking water from that river, and the incidence of cancer jumped, 10,000%. And they had to have this huge settlement. But I mean, once again, these companies pay these huge settlements, but you have 600 people who get cancer already. What do they care about the money, right? Once you've ruined your life and your health, right? It's after the fact. So for years and years and years, DuPont and 3M and these companies have been having factories all over the country, and they've just been dumping the remnants into the ground, into the soil, into the water, and that's seeped. I mean, literally, that's seeped all over the country, right? Along with, firefighting foam seeps into the groundwater, and but that was the major way, is they've literally just been dumping, and and there hasn't been government oversight, which is very sad. And then, like, before we got on the podcast, you were talking a little bit about the bio waste that people are using for fertilizer, right? Where people are repurposing and cleaning sewage sludge, for lack of a better term,
right,
and using it as a fertilizer, and a lot of that has PFAS. So if you're using that and you're putting it directly into your farms, directly onto your crop beds, and then food's growing out of there, it's the food itself is going to have PFAS in it.
Yeah.
Not even from packaging, but just from the soil. So that's another way that it's gotten into the land.
There's a great came out in 2023. It was I think a Vice magazine did it, and it was almost like a documentary, but they published it on YouTube, and it followed several farms, I want to say in Michigan, where they had accepted this, quote, free fertilizer, aka biosolids, and from whoever was offering it to them, the EPA, and then found out later they had meat. It was a cattle rancher, had meat seized from their coolers, and it tested so high for PFAS they had to stop everything. Now their land is completely ruined. All of their customer base has to throw away the meat. They have no food. I mean, it's destroying communities.
Yes,
it's insane. I'll link that documentary too, because I'm sure people are going to want to see it. But
I used to really like Vice. They used to have some great stuff on that.
Yeah,
on that channel. They had some like really good in-depth reporting. I don't think they have it anymore, but I used to really like that.
So this was a great one. I think it's pretty recent, and it just shows you how it's almost unbelievable. I think that's the reason why consumers have a hard time changing their behavior, is because if I were to sit down with some random person at the grocery store and be like, hey, listen, XYZ might be in your food and water supply, they're going to be like, nah, come on, we've got regulatory agencies. Like, this is the US. Like, we keep it locked down. And I would love to hear your opinion of that, since you're in the space of like, no, really, we need to be conscientious consumers, because there's a lot going on. We can't expect these governing bodies to check all the boxes. And like you said, sometimes the science hasn't even caught up to the manufacturing. And what are we manufacturing right now today that we're not going to find out about its repercussions until 20 years from now?
Yeah.
So how do you have conversations with people just every day of like, hey, you need to be aware of this, not to fearmonger, but to have real education? How do you have those conversations?
Yeah, I'll tell you exactly what I would tell somebody. And then also I'd like to talk about more of the hurdles that people have, though, actually trying to change their behavior, and most of it's economic, right? Which is why, but let's I'll get into the first part of your question first. Here's what I tell people. Did you know that right now there's no level set by the federal government for the amount of lead that can be in baby food? There's not a level.
Wow.
There's just not. Our government, the FDA, there's no level set that companies that Gerber, Nurture Inc., Beech Nut, there's no level when they're selling pouches of baby food or little cans of baby food that you're feeding your infant. There's no level set by the federal government. There's no checking. There's no testing for how much lead is in that.
Wow.
So if you think the government's doing its job and you think they're on top of everything, they're not. And once again, to me, that is like, what else should they be doing? That should be number one on the list, making sure that our kids have clean food, right? A clean baby food. And there's this proposed law that in 2 years they're going to set a level of 5 parts per billion. And right now it's like a recommendation from the FDA, but it's not a law, and there's no penalties, and there's no testing going on, right? So they're basically leaving it up to these corporations to sell these products, and and say, oh, they're clean, they're organic, they don't have lead, they don't have heavy metals, but nobody's watching over them and nobody's regulating it. So if you think the government is doing a great job regulating things, think about that. Think about how important that is. Baby food, right? During development, and there's no federal level set for lead.
There was a recent case with baby food. Was it Abbott?
Formula?
They make Pedialyte, Pediasure, I think.
Yeah.
That was recently that recently happened, and I know this because I was friends with one of the people in the market research. She's left, but in the market research side of that company.
Wow. And
they were going through a major lawsuit. And I can't remember what it was, though. There was something about their factory being...
The factory was contaminated, and it wasn't... They had a bunch of bacteria, and it wasn't cleaned properly, essentially, and it contaminated a bunch of lots of Pediasure, right? Or the
Oh
formula.
my.
And a bunch of kids got sick. Right?
Wow.
So, so once again, regardless of your politics, to me, that's the kind of thing that Congress and the president need to do. That's the kind of laws that we need to have in place, and that would actually help all Americans, right? Because everybody has babies, whether you're Democrats or Republicans or whatever. You all have kids, and everybody wants their kids to be healthy, right? And everybody needs their kids to not get lead poisoned so that they develop properly. So that's what I would say to somebody that thinks the government is on top of it. Just look at that. Look at that basic thing. And if they're not on top of that, and they're not regulating lead in baby food, do you think they're regulating all this other stuff? Do you think they're on top of it? Do you think they're doing enough testing? No, they're not. That's why you have to be a conscientious consumer, right? Yeah. Now, what's the flip side of that? The hard part of that, my family, we get all our meat, we get all our eggs, we get all our chicken from farmers markets, right? Like we go to a farmer's market once, and a bunch of fruit, and we very organic, very healthy from farmers that are local, right? But who can afford to do that? Right? It's expensive. And I have two little kids, and they eat a lot, and it's they're growing boys. Let's put it that way. That's not like a stereotype, Right. And they eat a ton, and it's very expensive for us to be able to do it. Luckily, we're able to do it, but it's hard to tell other consumers, right, that are on a budget or struggling, or everything is expensive right now because of inflation. It's hard to tell them, hey, don't go buy that chicken from the market, even though don't go buy, those eggs, don't get that fruit from there. Go spend more money because it's healthier for you. Some people just can't physically do it, right? That's why it's even more important that the government oversees these huge corporations that feed the vast majority of Americans, right? The vast majority of Americans, we get our food from these huge corporations, right? From, the same, if you really look into what companies own all the brands, it's like 5 companies own everything, right? It's just the way it works now. Everything has become consolidated, right? So it's a government thing. The government has to get in there and make sure that food products that are being sold to the vast majority of Americans, are healthy and don't have PFAS and don't have lead and this kind of stuff. So I always I feel like a broken record when I talk about this stuff, but it's all about the government. This is something they have to do because it's such a big problem. Private industry won't clean itself up. Private lawyers like me can only do so much. Right. It has to be like a government. The only entity that has the funding and the ability to do stuff on like such a big scale is federal government.
Yeah, it's such a double-edged sword because it's like really wide food distribution. It sounds like a wonderful idea. Yes, let's make sure everyone has access to food. But then you get into the nitty-gritty of what happens when that really wide distribution causes the food quality to suffer so much. And yeah, that was going to be my other question is like, well, is there room in the private sector for companies to come out and self-certify and sort of educate the consumer? But every time you have a company that emerges like that, you're talking about a premium dollar. You're talking about a higher price point. And deservedly so. I'm not saying we shouldn't pay companies who are doing well, but that doesn't solve the question of, well, what do we do for everyone? What do we do for folks on welfare, folks on WIC, folks who are their only option is to purchase food. And I think it's an amazing thing. There's lots of programs that allow folks who are on tighter budgets to still have access to real food. You can use your EBT cards at a lot of farmers markets, but even just throwing that out there sounds flippant. I know that food is really big struggle when it comes to families' finances. So it's this tension of like, let's be an educated consumer. Let's demand more from our government regulatory agencies. And then let's also open up space in the like private sector for companies who want to come out and show us that they're willing to go the extra mile to make sure that their products are safe. And the market will help them decide. Those who can afford to support those companies hopefully would do so. So it's to me, it feels like a very mixed solution we'd have to call on. When it comes
it's complicated. Think about all the issues you just raised.
Right.
And all the issues that come along with all of that, the economics of it, the feasibility of it, the government intervention, the private sector trying to do certain things, making sure the companies that claim they're a certain way are a certain way and they're not false advertising. Like it's complicated stuff, totally. There's no easy answer, for all that. It's, the economics of feeding this many people in our country and making sure everybody has access to food. and and how does that affect whether it's healthy or the quality? And it's very complicated stuff.
It is complicated. That's one of the reasons why I really enjoy seeing people who have little and they make the most out of it. I'll never forget, I have a friend who runs a farmer's market, and she said her very best customer is on welfare, and he comes every single week and he buys everything from them, and he like walks a mile to get there. And those stories are so inspirational to me. I know that's not representative of everyone's reality, but even just this like general homesteading movement that we see, everyone kind of jokes about like wanting chickens in their backyard. We don't have chickens in our backyard, but like even the idea that Americans can start to produce some of their own food, I think is really, really helpful and beautiful, as long as it doesn't become this, I just want to hop on a trend and have a certain aesthetic. I don't really care about that. I just want you to feed your families well, however that looks.
Totally.
I don't want people that don't have, a really free amounts of money to spend on upping their game. Like, I think there's two approaches. We've talked about this a bunch of times.
Yeah.
There's one approach to a real food journey, and that approach tends to look like a financial approach, wherein I throw away all of my pans, I buy all new ones. It's like, I completely change my grocery budget, and when I buy my meats, it's at a higher price tag because I'm having it shipped in from wherever. That is a financial approach. There's also a time approach where you can spend time. You don't have the budget. Maybe you have no budget for this. And I would encourage those people, start somewhere. Start by educating, learning. That, like, if you're listening to this right now, then I know at least you have some access to the internet, and there's so much information and things you can learn, even listening to someone like Vineet talk right now, right? You are learning things that you can take into your everyday life. And when the time comes to swap out, or, man, my nonstick pan is time to go. Well, guess what is really similar in price to a nonstick pan? A cast iron pan.
Yeah, cheaper,
right?
actually.
You could buy a cast iron, and guess what? If you're looking to really watch your budget with your the things that you're purchasing, well, buy something that's going to last forever, like a cast iron pan, right?
Yes.
Or a stainless steel pan, right? These things last forever, and you're going to be protecting yourself, like we were just talking about, from some of those things might leach out. Man, I can't afford the $15 eggs, right? But I know enough to know that, man, these eggs are better for me than the Pop-Tarts, right? And there's some things that maybe there's some trade-offs that I can make, and that education will go so much further than just kind of like falling down and saying, you know what, there's no hope for me. And I would tell those people that don't have the budget, man, there's hope.
Yeah,
there is so much hope. Do we live in a broken situation where there's just so many things working against us? I mean, Vineet just said right here on this show, there is no limit to the amount of lead in baby food. And so many questions came to my mind. Like, are we talking like formula? Are we talking like jars? Like, what are we talking about here, right? Like, that's concerning, right? But man, it's this idea of being an educated consumer. Like, I flip the label around. That goes a long way. Knowing what to look for. What am I reading? Why am I looking for these things? Why am I considering what kind of package this was put in? You know what? Like, I'm going to skew towards more of these, glass packages. I don't know if that's true. I'm just saying these sorts of things come to mind for me in this situation. Anyways, I'm really passionate about the budget thing, because economically there's some major barriers, and a huge passion of mine is like, well, what can we do? And I think education's a big part of that.
I think that's awesome. Because look, even making small steps today, right, of what you can actually do leads you to a healthier lifestyle, and leads you to maybe being able to do different things further on down the line if your economic situation changes. So what you said about do what you can do, become more educated at a minimum, right? That's huge. That kind of stuff, right? Take a little more personal thought about what you're eating and what you're buying, and learn about stuff. That's the first step. And I would also say, tell that story about that person who walks a mile and uses his EBD card to get food at the farmer's market. Tell that to more people. Tell that story a lot, because there's so many just on a tangent, right? There's so many stereotypes about people that receive government aid and government help, and still people think they're lazy and they don't give a shit about anything. And I don't think that's the case for the vast majority of people that get aid. I think they're trying and doing the best that they can, and they have hard situations, and it's tough, and life's hard. So I would say tell that story to everybody. Tell that a lot more, because that's the kind of thing people need to hear, and that kind of thing will change some minds about different people.
Totally.
Yeah, pride is real, right?
Yeah.
And it can flare up in negative ways, for sure. I do it all the time. But pride also is a real human behavioral like trait. Everyone has it. And to think that people that are having a hard time in one way or another, whether it be finances or marital or family or health or whatever it is, to think that pride isn't there, that's from like an empathy practice, right? Man, you think they don't care that they're in this? I'm with you. I think the vast majority of people, man, that if they could figure a way out, they would.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, the story of the person walking a mile to get to the farmer's market to buy awesome food because they want to, improve their health. You know what? I wouldn't be surprised if a couple of years from now, she's like, well, now he drives here,
Mm-hmm.
or
Totally.
Yeah.
I would not be surprised.
Yeah. Agreed.
Goes back to that really controversial episode we did of are people doing the best they can with the tools they currently have, but it's fine. We won't go back to there. I would love to know, Vineet, just since you are like in the industry, how does this affect your everyday consumer habits? What are things you're looking out for? What are things you might be avoiding? I know you talked about your cookware, but I'd love to hear kind of lifestyle wise. How do you approach life?
Yeah, we're in my household, me and my wife, and so I have a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old, right? So they're little and growing and just learning about food habits and food and the stuff, right? That's going to stay with them for the rest of their life. And we're big on real food, right? We're big on non-processed stuff. We try to stay away from packaged goods, right? Ultra processed to the greatest extent possible. We always go organic when we can. We try to buy local from, food growers. And once again, another good thing about California is there's so much agriculture here,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you go to the farmer's market and there's every week around our area, there's a different farmer's market in a different little city that you can go to. And they have local goods, local fruit, local vegetables, local chicken, local meat, so that's good. So we do a lot of that. We stay away from plastic products as much as we can. Just kind of an overall whole food life, real
Mm-hmm.
food. Like you said it right earlier when you said real food, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're big on that. We're huge on that. And it's made us healthier and my kids are growing great and just trying to teach them good habits about real food and stay away from the processed stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Stay away from anything ultra processed, stay away from too much plastic stuff. We keep all our nuts and fruits and seeds and spices. My wife cooks a lot with spices in glass containers, right?
Mm.
Because you can get them at IKEA and they're not expensive. They fit in everybody's budget. You can get these little glass containers and keep all your stuff in them, and then you're not going to be worried about plastic leaching into the food, leaching into your spices, leaching into all your stuff, right? Some more glassware is something we do. That's about it. Kind of real food, organic approach to things, local whenever we can. I think that's a big deal, and because that also you're supporting the local economy and you're allowing farmers to be able to do what they do and still serve people around here, which is the other component of it, right? So much of it is economic, and you got to make sure that people can afford to sell good, healthy products to you, and you can still do it, and they have a market for it, and that people can buy it.
Mm-hmm.
So we try to support local as much as we can as well.
I love that. I used to be better. I think it's easier in the summer to spend about 50% of your weekly budget on local because there's just so much more abundance in the summertime. In the wintertime, it's a little harder, but that's really a goal of mine is like, I really want to impact my local food economy, my local farmers, even if I would consider local up to 2 hours away, but still much closer than, shipping in oranges from California. And then, doing the best you can with what you have. I think that's really, really helpful. I wonder too, did you have any, was anything hard to give up for you, or have you ever come across a case where you're like, man, I didn't see this coming, and I found lead, cadmium, PFAS, whatever, in an unsuspecting place that really bums me out because now I have to give up that thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Not me personally, but my partner Miguel. He real into supplements and being healthy and whatnot. And then when we found that athletic greens, that
AG1,
AG1 that they market, it's got bad stuff in it. It's got lead in it. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Wait, tell me. I need to hear these details because everyone raves about AG1. I would say everyone's podcast sponsor.
I know we've we've tested, quite a bit of it, and it contains levels of lead that exceed the levels that California says you can have in a daily serving.
What?
Yeah. And so, and they actually have, so one of the ways in Prop 65 that you comply with the law is you put a warning label on the product so people know, right? So consumers, because a lot of this is about consumer awareness and being an educated consumer and making your own decisions and personal responsibility and all that stuff. And so they actually have tucked away on their website, they have a little Prop 65 warning that says this product contains lead, blah, blah, blah. And they have another section on their site that says, oh, we just have that on here because California's crazy and they make us do this. But in reality, they have it on there because it contains lead in levels that are higher than you're supposed to have in a day. So when he found that out, he gave them up and he was super bummed about it.
Wow.
Super bummed because, he thought he was doing something super healthy for him every morning, and drinking a glass of AG1 and getting all the nutrients, but you're also getting lead,
And where is that lead coming from? Is it in the actual like herbs and greens, or where?
Yeah,
like...
it's another soil issue. It's another issue where they're procuring all the herbs and the greens to make their mix. That soil is contaminated with lead. So wherever they're getting it from, and it's a global problem, right? So it could be outside of the country, it could be inside the country. There's contamination all over the place, and apparently they're not requiring testing of that soil where they're getting their greens for their mix, or they're getting it tested and they don't care, or whatever they're doing. They're getting components that have lead in them and then they mix them up and put them in their mix. So that was a big one. Like that was one where he found out about that and he was super bummed out about it.
That's surprising.
Yeah, and really it's bad because you're also thinking you're doing something so good for your body, right? It's not like you're eating a cheeseburger and you're like, oh, I know that's not really good for me, but I'm gonna eat it because I love it, right? And have one occasionally. You're thinking, man, this is gonna help me every single day. I'm getting nutrients, and you're also getting lead at the same time. So
how exceeded is the lead level to what we should have every day? So this is like more lead than you should be exposed by any other product.
Yeah. So essentially what the California, and once again, California is one of the only states that has any kind of a standard for this. So that's why I can bring a lot of actions in California, because there's a level set, right? Because if there's no level set, I can't go to a court and say, hey, this is unhealthy or this is healthy, right? But if there's a level that says, hey, you can only have, and in California, it's 0.5 micrograms a day. So there's any product, and I actually think it should be way lower than that. And I think they should look at cumulative, how many different products have lead in them. I don't think it's a great standard, but it's something, right? So essentially, any product can expose you to more than 0.5 micrograms a day. And what we found with AG1 was it's triple, 3 to 4 times that in one serving. So you're getting about 1.5 to 2 micrograms of lead in each serving of that product. So it's way, it's not even close. It's not even they're like, oh, we're at 0.6. We're pretty close. It's 3 to 4 times.
And so they put their label on their website, but they don't have to tell you, hey, we're exceeding California, because it's not federal. It's just California. And it's so easy to just say, hey, California people are crazy, right? It's what everyone in the States does.
They literally have language in their FAQs on their site that says something like that. Oh, we just have to put it on there because California has these crazy laws, So, and that's why I'm like, so when you asked me that question earlier about would a company ever claim that their filter actually works when it doesn't, I'm very skewed. Because of the work we do, because of how many companies we have to sue that are selling dangerous products, that are selling toxic products, that are selling products with misleading advertising, just false statements in general. It's why I'm very wary of big corporations in general, because just I see it every day in my work. I see companies lying to people and selling toxic goods and trying to get away with what they can to make money, right? And that's why they're doing it, right? They want to sell more goods. And they want to sell cheaper products, and a lot of these cheaper products contain all these crazy chemicals.
Do you think...
So there's economics involved once again.
Totally.
in this whole cycle of nonsense, right?
Right. Do you think could we say someone like me who lives in Ohio and I don't have all of the same local regulations, could I look at California as a filter to say, hey, if they're Prop 65 compliant, this is a safe product? Or so is that a good tool for consumers to use? Or maybe explain exactly what Prop 65 is saying too, because I think there's some confusion.
Absolutely. So it basically has a list of like I don't know, 700 chemicals. And all these chemicals, the state agency has found that they either cause cancer or they cause reproductive harm. So if you're pregnant and you get exposed to these chemicals, potentially your child could have birth defects. And, basically what the law says is if a company is selling a product with a chemical that exceeds like the daily, where exposure to that chemical would be over the daily allowance set. So that's where it goes back to toxicologists, where it's not just it contains this chemical, but if regular usage exceeds this daily standard set, then you have to either not sell it anymore, you have to remove the chemical in its entirety, or you have to place a warning label on the product that says, warning, this product contains this chemical. So consumers are aware, at least, right? So it's kind of a consumer awareness thing at its heart. And so, so if you're in Ohio and you see some products that have that Prop 65 warning label on it, I would stay away from them. I would pick a product that doesn't have that label on it, because the good thing about, even though it's just a statewide law, California has such a huge marketplace that, if companies have to add a warning label or change a product because of California, they're going to do it a lot of times they're going to do it for the whole country, for all the products that they ship around. They're going to make the factory do it before they ship products to anywhere in America.
That makes sense.
I would, right? Like if I tell people, a lot of people say, oh, it's Prop 65 has led to like over warning and there's warning labels everywhere and it's saturated consumers. But I still tell them, look, if I go to a store and I see one bag of spices that says warning contains lead, and I see one that doesn't, I'm going to buy the one that doesn't, right? I'm going to make that decision and potentially make myself healthier, right? If I'm going to get a tool or a hammer and one says it contains DEHP and there's another one that doesn't, I'm going to get the one that doesn't, right? That goes back to what you were saying. Do what you can with what you can, right? And knowledge is everything, right? If you have knowledge about things, you can make better, more informed decisions, right?
Is it just things that are manufactured in California, or is it things that are sold in California? Sold. So
which is good, because things can be manufactured anywhere in the world.
Okay.
And if they're sold in California, they have to comply with these regulations.
Okay. That was going to be my question, because maybe your spices came from a different state that didn't have to pass that regulation. But if that same brand is also sold in the state of California, it would have to comply.
Right.
Good to know.
That's right.
Wow. Okay. That's amazing. I don't know how you don't carry a level of skepticism, honestly. Like I think I would feel the same way of just being in that space and
everyone's lying,
being duped, no, not everyone's lying, that's got to be hard.
But look, I'm not a negative guy. I'm an optimist. I'll tell you, I'm a very positive guy. I'm an optimistic guy. I see I'm really a cup half full, and that's the way I live my life, and I do that, and I have so much to be thankful for, and so much to appreciate in my life, and being an American and growing up in this country and having what we have, and everything that entails, along with the downsides of it. There's so many positive things, right? I'm an optimist, and I think we can change these things, and I think we can still clean up our environment. And I think, not just my kids, but hopefully their kids and their kids can enjoy the environment and enjoy what we have, and still live a good life. And I think we can still do it, right? So even with all this craziness, right? Even with all the corporate malfeasance that we see, I still, I'm an optimist. I'd still try to stay positive about things. I'm skeptical about things, but, it doesn't depress me. I'm not, I don't wake up just sad about life. Right?
Yeah.
I think you can't, you have to appreciate what you have and still, keep kicking, right?
So we talked about PFAS, lead, phthalates, I think, and then we talked about one other. You said it like on the tools. Just curious, what for your work? I'm actually just curious about, and I'm probably just going to ask questions until you tell me I don't want to talk about that anymore. But I'm just really fascinated by your actual work, right? And so, one first question that I kind of written down here is, what are all the different chemicals that you're dealing with on a regular basis? I mean, maybe it's too long of a list to talk about, but I named a few of those. I know that you're more recently into PFAS, but what else is out there that you're really working against currently?
Yeah, that's the main crux of the practice. Is I do cases with lead, I do cases with phthalates, and so phthalates incorporates DEHP, DINP, DBP, and they have these long chemical names. So we do a lot of phthalate cases. And once again, those are like PFAS light, essentially. They're plasticizers. They're using all kinds of plastic goods, and they're just not as strong, and they don't last as long. And
that's good.
But they still hurt you, right? Which is not great. We just started doing PFAS cases There's another chemical called diethylamine that I do some cases on, and it's a chemical that is in a lot of like shampoos and sunscreen and lotion. And once again, this is something that causes cancer. And if it's in your shampoo, you're going to use it every single morning, right? Or if it's in your lotion, you're going to use it every single day when you get out of the shower, or however times, you put on lotion. So that's kind of a scary one too, because it's like just direct contact every single day. So in terms of like exposure, that's a bad one. But those are the major ones that I'm dealing with.
So my follow-up question to that is, and whatever you're able to share, are there cases that you've worked on from these different chemicals that would, to give people kind of like a reference point? I mean, we talked about the AG1, which for lead, which I think is a great example of, sometimes it's hard for me to visualize. And I think even just like examples of cases that maybe you've worked on or that you're aware of that would give people an idea of like, man, I'm looking at this shampoo. Are we talking about like some off-brand? Are we talking about, like Procter & Gamble, right?
Right.
Yeah, we're talking about Johnson & Johnson and Procter & Gamble and Bondi. I have a lot of cases against Bondi. That brand, I don't know if you've seen it, but it's like a sunscreen lotion.
Okay.
A lot of those. I had a lead in like toddler food case against Nurture Inc. They did the Happy Tots brand.
Okay.
And so they are working to clean up their products now because of the lawsuit. So that was a big one. And it was like a little thing of, I want to say it was mac and cheese. And then another thing of like ravioli that comes for Happy Tots, right? So for toddlers. So that was a pretty big one. In terms of PFAS, a lot of food packaging cases. So I have a lot of cases right now going, a few cases against Target. Their paper plates and paper bowls, we think, exceeds the level that is allowed for PFAS.
Wow.
So I mean, it's big companies that we're going after. We're not going after the small guys here.
Yeah, well.
I have a ton, I would say, I don't, I have a ton of phthalate cases for products that were bought at Ross or TJ Maxx. Those places are just chock full of poisonous chemicals. So, do with that what you will, right?
So it's all over the place. Okay.
Yeah.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
Is it because they're sort of like, it's not a secondhand store, but TJ Maxx is like stuff that didn't sell on the shelves, they sell, right? Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, and Burlington Coat Factory as well.
Yeah.
They have a lot of they have a lot of stuff that like leftover inventory.
Yeah.
They get, right? They'll get a couple of lots of, goods that didn't sell elsewhere. And a lot of it's like, kind of cheap plasticky stuff that contains a lot of phthalates.
Shoot. One year we did all of our Christmas shopping at Burlington Coat Factory. You remember that?
I wasn't there.
No, you and me together. Yeah, we did.
Was I?
Yeah, we bought for our kids. This was like 3 or 4 years ago. And now
Burlington Coat Factory?
Yeah, because they have like, it's confusing because they're a coat factory, but they've got
a lot of stuff.
Skincare, they have bags. Yeah, they have clothes.
I do remember that. Yep. I remember.
So that's interesting.
Backpacks. And boots.
Now I'm thinking like, okay. Man, paper. For some reason, I always assume like plastic's the absolute enemy and everything paper is clean. But twice now you've mentioned paper products containing PFAS. Is it because of the coating on the paper?
Yeah.
Like I've heard a lot about the coffee cup, right? Like the paper cup that everyone gets their coffee in containing PFAS potentially. And everyone's like freaking out over. And I'm like, just stop going to Starbucks. Like just stop. It'll save you money. Like you don't need it. It's non-necessity. Like
I'll tell you a quick funny story about that. So our offices are in downtown Los Angeles. When we initially started, our offices were in Pasadena, and we had a small office, and it's just me and my partner. And we used to walk across the block to our Union Bank to do all our banking and stuff. And we would always walk in there and make deposits. And they had a great killer little coffee machine for customers to use. And it was like really good, all these different brands. You can make cappuccinos. So we'd always get a quick coffee. And then one of the bankers that we used to talk to a lot, his desk was literally 5 feet away from that coffee, and they were allowed to use it. And every single time we went in there, he had a Starbucks cup on his desk. And me and Miguel were always like, dude, you're throwing your money away. You have this incredible coffee for free from your work. And yet every day you go, and he was just like, oh, I know. I just love Starbucks. And it drove us crazy. Because we were like, man, like 5 feet away from you is like delicious coffee. And this dude's spending $8 a day on his Starbucks.
And it's not even good. It doesn't even taste good. I'm sorry. It tastes over roasted.
Yeah.
I can't. I can't.
Totally. I know that was a tangent. What was
well,
I
we were
about?
I was saying paper products. Like I'm
paper
hearing
okay.
paper products
So
are
you
coming
know what it
up.
does? It makes so phthalates. They put a coating on these paper products to make them waterproof and to make them more resilient.
Okay.
So whatever. So if you're using a plastic cup or a bowl, it's going to be more waterproof for you. Or if it's food packaging, it's going to be stronger. Like I have one of those cases pending with like Mission tortilla chips, right? Mission's huge company. They make tortilla chips, and some of their chip packaging, has too much PFAS.
And they have the paper bags, right?
Yeah, the paper bags. There you go.
And shoot.
And they use it to make it, just more stronger, right? So they last longer.
To make the paper bag more strong.
Make the paper bag stronger, so it lasts longer and it won't tear when it's shipped or when you use it or something like that. So that's why a lot of paper products are coated for waterproofing and just to make them more resilient. And once again, had California not passed this law about it, we wouldn't know what to test for or how to see if the limits are too high, and we wouldn't be able to bring lawsuits about it. But now that they passed a law that said you test, and if it's over X amount, you can bring an action, right?
Are you ever representing a victim of any kind, or is it always that you found data to act on?
Always data to act on, just in my practice. In my practice, it's not. It's I work with environmental groups. Mainly. Okay. And then, and the victim angle, it's hard to know, right? Because I would have to have somebody that came to me and said, "Hey, I ate this product, and then I got cancer."
Yeah.
We don't know. It's an accumulation of things, right? The reason so many people get cancer is because they're exposed for 30 years to 800,000 different products, right?
Right.
Or the air or the water or whatever. So that direct causal link is very hard. So I couldn't bring a case like that, but it's more about working with environmental groups on a bigger scale to test products and get them off the shelves. Or if they're,
I don't know, I'm sure you've heard of them. Moms Across America is a wonderful advocacy group. Jen Honeycutt heads that. She's always looking at glyphosate exposure in food supplies. They did a school lunch testing program where they privately tested school lunches and found just horrid results. We've had her on the show twice. Dr. Jenna Hua of Million Marker, she is they sell testing kits at home for you to test your own kind of bodily accumulation of toxins. And she does a lot of work about educating consumers on the everyday products that could be harmful to you. I think she's also in California. There's just so many people that we've had on the show before that are echoing what you've said. And I think that is encouraging that we have people approaching the challenge from different angles. We've got the consumer education, we've got the actual litigators, we've got the state, one singular state that's trying to work hard to make sure we get this information secured. But yeah, I think that's really cool. What other questions did you have?
That's it for me for now. Yeah, I mean, I was just interested the actual I didn't want you to say, hey, open up the bag of your black book of all the all the bad people out there. But it was just nice for me to kind of get an example of so we're talking to Target. They've got these plates, and here's some of the things that we're finding, because it's so easy for us to sit here and talk about all the bad things, and then your mind starts racing. You're like, okay, so now what, right? And I think there's definitely a trend in plastic, right? I would say there's a trend in that, and there's also a trend in being aware of the food that you're eating, right? And we can't go live in a bubble. And being aware that I'm eating and ingesting food, even the idea of I'm working with tools and stuff all day long, and go and wash your hands, right? And just some of the practical things that Vineet's talked about, I think, is really powerful, because
wear your gloves.
Wear your gloves. Yeah,
you're dealing with tools. Wear your gloves. Always just put them on.
Just put them on,
and that'll help. That'll help with exposure, right? And wash your hands a ton. And that's good for you anyway in terms of not getting sick, right? So it dovetails, right?
And how many people are switching from plastic products to paper products, not realizing that there's a coating on their paper stuff, right? Again, it comes down to that convenience.
What fragrance soaps, right? You got to wash your hands. And are we talking anything going on there with fragrance soaps that you're putting, PFAS or chemicals or whatnot into your system?
Yeah, not that we found. So not that I'm involved with or aware of. So
for PFAS specifically, you mean?
Yeah, I can't speak to that. Like I said, some of the shampoos, some of the lotions and sunscreens we found have contained products, but nothing really on soap.
Cool. Well, wonderful. I would love to hear where people can find you, Vineet, because I think that your work is so interesting. So if you could tell us a little bit about that before we sign off, that'd be great.
Sure. cd-lawyers.com. That's our website. CD Law, that's kind of what we go by. We're based in downtown Los Angeles. We have a ton of social media for our law firm. And cool. Maybe after this, I'll have Gustavo. He can email you links or whatever. Yeah. I don't know if you guys put that up. But that's about it. cd-lawyers.com. And wonderful. And look us up. It has all our information, has all the stuff that we do. And if anybody wants to chat with us or, has cases, let us know. Potential cases.
I love that. Yeah, I love that. Yeah. Thank you for taking your time today. This has been a very eye-opening conversation, so I appreciate it.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. And once again, don't get too depressed if you listen to this podcast. The world is, I know it's a depressing subject and it can be kind of scary, but there's things we can all do to keep ourselves safe. And like I said, I look at the positive things that I have in my life every single day, and that kind of keeps me going and keeps me from getting too skewed or too depressed about things. And I think everybody should kind of do that if you can.
I love that. Thank you for that reminder too. That's good.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll be talking soon, Vineet. Thank you so much.
Yeah, stay in touch, please. Anything else we can do or collaborate on or talk about, let me know. This is really interesting.
Cool.
Love it.